In Qhamani, the sun didn't rise. It bled over the horizon, waking the world with a harsh golden glare. For 10-year-old Lerato, the dawn was merely a signal to begin the labor of survival. Her fingers, calloused and stained with the citrus oils of 1,000 rinds, worked with mechanical precision as she stacked the oranges. Each fruit was a tiny, hopeful sun in her wooden crate. The air was a blade of ice that sliced through her thin cardigan, settling deep within her marrow. By 6 a.m., she was a statue by the roadside, her breath visible in rhythmic puffs of white. 1 for 2 rand, 3 for 5, she would recite, her voice a melodic contrast to the gravelly roar of the passing trucks. On good days, the crate emptied by noon, and she could afford a small tin of pilchards for her mother. On bad days, the hunger was a physical weight, a hollow echoing in her ribs that no amount of water could drown. Her mother, Sarah, was a woman of fading strength but unyielding dignity. She would watch Lerato from the porch, her eyes reflecting the guilt of a parent who could not provide. "One day, Lerato," she would whisper, "your hands will hold books, not just crates." But Sarah died when the winter grew too bold, leaving 13-year-old Lerato with nothing but a crumbling shack and the village's collective but limited pity. In Qhamani, you learned quickly that dignity was a luxury, yet Lerato wore it like a regal shroud. She learned to smile through the ache in her arches, understanding that in the eyes of the world, her only value was her resilience. She was the girl who survived, a living testament to the endurance of the human spirit. Thabo was the only boy who didn't look at the dust when he spoke. While others talked of the next harvest or the local football match, Thabo stared toward the distant, invisible skyline of Johannesburg. He and Lerato had shared a childhood of scraped knees and stolen guavas, but as the years pulled them into adulthood, a different bond formed, one forged in the shared fire of ambition. Thabo was handsome in a way that felt misplaced in the rural quietude of Qhamani. He had a restlessness in his limbs, a frantic energy that suggested he was always running, even when standing still. "Look at this place, Lerato," he said one evening, kicking at the parched earth until a cloud of red dust obscured his boots. "It's a graveyard for ambition. It eats dreams and spits out ghosts. I won't be a ghost." Lerato listened, her heart hammering against her ribs. To her, Thabo was the personification of a life she couldn't yet imagine. When he spoke of glass towers that touched the clouds and streets that hummed with the electricity of opportunity, she saw a future for both of them. She became his silent partner in escape. For 3 years, she took on every demeaning task available, scrubbing the floors of the wealthy farmers until her knees bled, doing the laundry of the village elders until her knuckles were raw. Every cent was tucked away in a hollowed-out brick beneath her bed. It wasn't just money, it was the physical manifestation of her love and her hope. When the day finally came for him to leave, she handed him the small, heavy pouch of coins and crumpled notes. "Go," she whispered. "Build the world you promised." He held her hands, his eyes wet with a promise that felt as solid as stone. The first 6 months were filled with letters and frantic, crackling phone calls from payphones. Thabo told her of the noise, the sheer scale of the city, and the way the lights never went out. He promised he was close to a breakthrough. Lerato lived on these words. They were her sustenance as she continued her cycle of labor in the village. She imagined him in a suit, walking those glass hallways, carrying a piece of her with him. But slowly, the frequency of the calls began to wither like a plant denied water. The letters became short, impersonal notes, usually arriving only when he needed a little more startup capital for an unmissable opportunity. The vibrant boy who had kicked the dust of Qhamani was being replaced by a stranger with a clipped accent and a growing list of excuses. Lerato, blinded by her devotion, sent what she could, ignoring the whispers of the village gossips, who claimed he had already forgotten her. By the 2nd year, the silence was absolute. Johannesburg had swallowed him. Lerato would stand by the same roadside where she once sold oranges, looking toward the horizon, wondering if the city was a place of transformation or a place of erasure. She didn't know that Thabo was indeed transforming. He was learning to shed his skin. He stopped telling people where he was from. He began to invent a pedigree of struggle that didn't include a girl with orange-stained fingers. He was crafting a masterpiece of a lie, and the first stroke of the brush was the total deletion of Lerato from his history. He was no longer Thabo from Qhamani. He was Thabo, the rising star, a man who had risen from nothing entirely on his own. Naledi was everything Lerato was not. She was the daughter of a prominent judge, a woman whose skin had never known the bite of a winter wind without the protection of cashmere. They met at a rooftop gallery in Sandon, where the air smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. To Thabo, Naledi was the ultimate prize, the ultimate stamp of approval on his new identity. She was drawn to his rugged independence. When he told her he was an orphan with no living ties to his past, her heart broke for him. She saw him as a self-made titan, a man who had conquered the world without a safety net. Thabo played the role to perfection, using the poise he had practiced in front of his apartment mirror to charm her family. He spoke of his childhood in vague, tragic terms, ensuring there were no loose ends that could lead back to a crate of oranges. When their engagement was announced, it was a social event of the season. Photos of the golden couple began to circulate on social media. Thabo in a bespoke navy suit, Naledi draped in silk. Back in Qhamani, Lerato's cousin showed her a grainy image on a smartphone screen. Lerato stared at the man she had funded, the man she had held her hands in the moonlight. He looked radiant. He looked like he had never known her name. The betrayal wasn't a sharp pain. It was a slow, freezing realization that her entire life's work had been used to build a pedestal for a man who had now kicked her off it. She didn't cry. Instead, she felt a cold, hard clarity settle over her. The girl who learned the language of survival was about to enter the lion's den. The job advertisement had been anonymous, seeking a discreet and hard-working domestic worker for a residence in Bryanston. When Lerato applied, she didn't know it was his house. She only knew she needed to get to Johannesburg to find the truth. When the gates opened and she saw Thabo standing by the infinity pool, the air left her lungs. He froze, the glass in his hand trembling. The confrontation happened in the shadows of the kitchen that evening. "You will act like you don't know me," he hissed, his voice a jagged whisper. "I am a different man now. If you breathe a word of the past, I will ensure you are blacklisted from every agency in this city. You are a ghost, Lerato. Stay that way." He didn't offer back the money. He didn't offer an apology. He offered her a uniform, a stiff, gray polyester dress that was meant to make her invisible. Lerato took it. She needed the roof over her head, but more than that, she needed to see what she had bought with her life's savings. She became a shadow in the mansion, cleaning the glass offices Thabo had once dreamed of, scrubbing the floors of the bedroom he shared with Naledi. Naledi was frustratingly kind. She treated her with a gentle respect that made the deception even more agonizing. "You have such sad eyes, Lerato," Naledi said one afternoon while Lerato was polishing the silver. "Is there someone back home you miss?" Lerato looked at Thabo, who was watching from the doorway with cold, warning eyes. "The woman I was is dead, madam. I'm just working to pay for the funeral." Life in the mansion was a psychological war of nerves. Thabo grew increasingly paranoid. His guilt manifested as cruelty. He would find faults in Lerato's cleaning, a smudge on a window, a misplaced book, using these as excuses to belittle her in front of Naledi, asserting his dominance to bury his fear. The breaking point arrived on a stormy Tuesday night when Naledi was away in Cape Town for a charity gala. Thabo returned home late, the scent of expensive scotch trailing him like a shroud. He found Lerato in the kitchen finishing her late-night chores. The sight of her, the living reminder of his humble, shameful beginnings, triggered a violent burst of insecurity. He began to rail against her, accusing her of hovering like a curse over his success. "You think you're better than me because you remember?" he shouted, his face flushed and distorted. "You're nothing. You're just a girl from the dirt." He cornered her, his movements erratic and aggressive. When he realized that his words wouldn't break her spirit, that she simply stood there, staring at him with a terrifyingly calm pity, he sought to break her body instead. He used his strength to pin her against the cold marble counter, a desperate attempt to reclaim the power he felt he was losing. It wasn't an act of passion, it was a desperate, ugly attempt to crush the only person who knew the truth of his soul. When it was over, he left her on the floor, throwing a stack of 100-rand notes at her. "Buy yourself some silence," he spat, before stumbling to his room. When Lerato realized she was pregnant, she felt a mixture of profound terror and a strange crystalline hope. This child was a product of a nightmare, but it was also hers, the only thing in the world that would truly belong to her. She tried to keep it hidden, wearing looser uniforms and tightening her apron, but the morning sickness was an enemy that could not be silenced. Thabo noticed first. The panic that seized him was absolute. If Naledi found out, his carefully constructed house of cards would be incinerated. He didn't wait for Lerato to speak. He went to Lerato with a fabricated story of betrayal. He claimed that Lerato had been obsessed with him, that she had tried to trap him in a moment of vulnerability, and that she was now claiming pregnancy to extort the family. He painted himself as the victim of a predatory servant. Naledi, whose world was built on trust and the assumption of Thabo's integrity, was devastated. The betrayal she felt was directed entirely at Lerato. "How could you?" Naledi asked, her voice trembling with hurt as Lerato was summoned to the foyer. "We treated you like family." Lerato looked at Thabo, who stood behind his wife, his face a mask of righteous indignation. She could have told the truth then, but she saw the way they were positioned, the two of them against the unstable maid. She knew she wouldn't be believed. She was fired, without a cent of her earned wages, her bags packed by security. As she walked out of the massive iron gates, Thabo watched from the upstairs window, a smirk of relief touching his lips. He thought he had finally buried his past. The streets of Johannesburg were far less forgiving than the hills of Qhamani. For a pregnant woman with no references and no money, the city was a labyrinth of concrete and indifference. Lerato spent the first few nights in a crowded shelter, clutching her bag to her chest as she slept upright. The noise was constant, a symphony of sirens and shouting that made the quiet of the village feel like a dream. She found work where she could, cleaning the toilets of a bus station in exchange for a few coins and the right to sleep in a storage closet. Her hunger was a constant companion, but she prioritized the life growing inside her, spending what little she had on milk and fruit. She remembered the oranges of her youth. She remembered how she had survived the frost. "We are made of iron," she would whisper to her belly. "He will not break us." She eventually found refuge in a church-run home for unwed mothers. There, she met women with stories like hers, stories of men who used and discarded, of lives interrupted by cruelty. It was here that Lerato began to shed her shame. She realized that her silence hadn't been a weakness, it had been a survival tactic. But survival was no longer enough. She began to learn, not just the language of the city, but the language of the law. She spent hours in the local library, reading about labor rights and paternal responsibility. She wasn't just a mother-to-be, she was a woman becoming an architect of her own justice. When her son, whom she named Neo, meaning gift, was born on a rainy October morning, she didn't see a burden. She saw a reason to fight. 5 years passed. Neo grew into a bright, observant boy with his mother's steady gaze. Lerato had worked her way up from a cleaner to a supervisor at a small catering company. She lived in a modest flat in Hillbrow, a place where every cent was accounted for, but where the air was free of Thabo's shadow. She had found a sense of peace, but fate, it seemed, was not finished with the story of Thabo and Lerato. The undoing of Thabo didn't come from a dramatic confrontation, but from a simple administrative error. Thabo had become a partner at a major investment firm, and Naledi was heading a foundation for women's empowerment. During a routine audit of Thabo's personal holdings for a high-level security clearance, an investigator flagged a series of recurring, large cash withdrawals from years prior, withdrawals that coincided with Lerato's time at the mansion. Simultaneously, Naledi discovered an old, discarded phone in a box of Thabo's things. On it were unsent drafts of messages to a contact listed only as L. The messages were desperate, rambling, and full of the very village details Thabo claimed he never knew. "I can't let them see where I came from," one draft read. "You are the only one who knows the truth." Naledi's world began to tilt. She hired her own private investigator, not because she wanted to find a mistress, but because she needed to know who her husband really was. The investigator found Qhamani. He found the stories of the girl who sold oranges to send a boy to the city, and finally he found a birth certificate for a boy named Neo, whose father's name was suspiciously absent, but whose birth date aligned perfectly with the incident at the mansion. The confrontation didn't happen in a kitchen, but in the boardroom of Thabo's firm. Naledi walked in during a partner meeting, her face a mask of cold, aristocratic fury. She didn't scream. She simply laid a folder on the mahogany table. It contained photographs of Qhamani, bank statements, and a recent photo of Neo. "You told me you were an orphan, Thabo. You told me you were a hero, but you are just a thief who stole a woman's life to buy a suit." Thabo's fall was catastrophic. The scandal of his rags-to-riches lie, coupled with the revelation of his treatment of Lerato, made him a pariah in the polished circles he fought so hard to join. The investment firm, fearing a PR nightmare, severed ties immediately. Naledi filed for divorce the next day, her empathy for Lerato finally outweighing her love for the man she thought she knew. Naledi tracked Lerato down to the catering company. When the two women met, there were no guards, no uniforms, and no lies between them. Naledi looked at Neo, seeing the unmistakable reflection of the man she had loved, but tempered by the strength of the woman who raised him. "I am so sorry," Naledi whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I was a footstool for his ego, and I let you step on you." Lerato took her hand. The humiliation of the past didn't vanish, but it transformed. "He didn't just step on me," Lerato said firmly. "He gave me the ground to stand on, and I am still standing." The happy ending wasn't a return to the mansion or a marriage to a prince. It was something far more substantial. With the settlement from a successful wrongful dismissal and defamation lawsuits led by Naledi's own father, the judge, Lerato didn't buy jewelry or designer clothes. She bought a small, thriving plot of land on the outskirts of the city and turned it into a community garden and education center. She called it the Orange Grove. It was a place where women from the rural areas could come to learn trades, literacy, and their legal rights, ensuring no one could ever erase them again. Neo attended one of the best schools in the city, not because of his father's name, but because of his mother's sweat. Thabo, stripped of his status and his wealth, eventually returned to the outskirts of Qhamani, a man haunted by the ghosts of the life he tried to burn. He was a stranger in his own home, a man who climbed so high he forgot how to walk on the ground. One afternoon, Lerato stood in her garden, the scent of citrus blossoms heavy in the warm Johannesburg air. She watched Neo running through the rows of trees, his laughter a bright silver sound. She felt the sun on her face, the same sun that used to bite her skin in the village, but now it felt like a blessing. She realized that Thabo was right about one thing: the world can eat dreams. But he was wrong about her. She wasn't the meal. She was the gardener. She had survived the frost, the fire, and the silence. As she picked a ripe orange and handed it to her son, she smiled. Survival wasn't just about staying alive, it was about blooming in the place they tried to bury you. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video, share and subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire, teach, and entertain. Until next time, bye!